Callie Finn, we have already been talking about WNBA free agency, but we are here. We are in the period of free agency. So WNBA free agency is a little different than NBA for people who may be new here. Because I think with NBA free agency, like day one, midnight, they expect like news to start dropping before Woj retired, Woj bombs, Shams bombs. So it's a little different, though I do think the WNBA eventually will probably get to that phase, right? But we kind of got our first bit of free agency news. I mean, we talked about Satu Sabli kind of indicating during Unrivaled that she's played her last game in Dallas, and we know some offers, some core offers have been extended. But not too long ago, about maybe an hour ago now, it was reported that Brittney Griner is going to be testing the free agent market for the first time in her career, which is, I think we all were just taking it for granted that she would be returning to Phoenix. I know I was. I wasn't even considering her as a potential free agent. And I mean, I knew she was, but I didn't even consider her someone that would be available. And now she could be, Callie. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think I read so many free agency primers and stories that were like, yeah, she's just likely to be a career Phoenix Mercury star. And like, okay, that is not clearly the case. It sounds like she wants to explore her options. And I kind of wonder what the past couple of months have like influenced, like how they've influenced that decision. Because I think about she's at the Olympics with a bunch of other WNBA stars and is now playing in Unrivaled. And, Alyssa Thomas, another top free agent herself, said that like this is the time to like talk to other people. Obviously, you separate some things like, playing from free agency and stuff like that. But this is the time where you learn things. And so I kind of wonder if that played a role. I also think too, we talked about this before, but like when you've been cored twice in your career, that's the case with Brittney Griner. And like now she has the freedom to explore free agency, and I think that so that's something that sometimes gets taken for granted when you have been cored twice and you're like happy and comfortable somewhere. But like this is completely within her right to do.
For sure. And, it's interesting because I'm wondering, well, first of all, I mean, she's Brittney Griner and she's very established and people know who she is. She's sort of on the back end of her career now. So, for the Olympics, she wasn't a starter. And even on the Unrivaled squad, she at least hasn't been a part of the starting three. But obviously, she's Brittney Griner, still a very talented player. She had to deal with a pesky injury at the beginning of last season, which I think altered her season, but she had still a solid season. And, she had also some really good games. So obviously can still be a very productive, high level starter in the WNBA. So I'm curious, the first couple of games of Unrivaled for her haven't been that great. They haven't been that great for Satu Sabli. Becky Hammond was at
And
the,
building. Yeah.
yes, she was at the game last night. I am curious. There's been a lot of just like scouts and WNBA people there. I'm wondering, in this new climate of Unrivaled with free agency, how, if at all, that's being used to sort of evaluate players, talk to players, meet with players. It sounds like Brittney Griner is meeting with people down in Miami. And if any of them are like looking, because like Satu also just hasn't looked like herself. And I don't know if it's the adjustment to 3-on-3. But you wonder if they're like, does Brittney Griner still got it? Does Satu still got it? I think they both do. I'm just saying, I'm wondering in this new climate, will that impact at all? Because normally you're just looking at their WNBA season, but now you also have the ability to sort of watch them in this Unrivaled league.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I wouldn't rule it out. I think what stands out to me when I think about that, though, is that like I think most basketball scouts and general managers and stuff like that are able to differentiate. Like 3-on-3 basketball is so different from your traditional 5-on-5, especially the way the Unrivaled is playing. They're not even playing your normal traditional 3-on-3. They're playing full court, but like on a compressed full court. It's
Very
so
fast
fast
paced.
paced, and it's not necessarily catered to. I mean, is not, I mean, it's catered to some people's skills. I think we're seeing that, but like it's not catered
Right.
to everyone's skills. And so I think that you can still watch a player in that type of game and glean things from how they might be useful to you in a WNBA season. I think also as it pertains to Brittney Griner, like I was looking at her stats before we hopped on this, like nearly 18 points and like 7 rebounds per game is production that
Yes.
any WNBA team could use. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
I think that what it'll come down to is like fit. If she is on the move, I mean, she's accustomed now to top of the line facilities. The Mercury introduced that, and so it's things like that that I think will make a difference. But also, can the team that she joins, if she were to leave the Mercury, afford to maybe have her like miss some games if there is more like pesky injury stuff? And those are just the things you have to keep in mind with a vet like Brittney Griner. You know, like BG has been in the league for a long time. You mentioned this is kind of like the tail end of her career. So that there's a risk accompanied with that. We saw the Aces take a big risk like that with Candace Parker, where it was like a huge blockbuster signing that seemed like it could have had a huge payoff, and then injuries just kind of prevented it from being
What it could have
well
been.
expected. So I think
Yeah.
that that's kind of what it comes down to with BG.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the Aces because before we wrap this up, I just have to obviously ask you because you're here. Do you think Brittney Griner is a player that the Aces could use, would be interested in? I know, having a big, true big, a traditional, a big in that lineup seems like it would be helpful. I'm wondering at all if it would impact the way they play because I think with a player like Brittney Griner, you probably have to play a slightly slower pace or maybe, but we don't know because we don't know about Kelsey. We don't know how that roster is going to look. But with this news of BG, I don't know who Becky Hammond is down there to talk to, but I'm just curious. Could this potentially be a player they should be targeting, Callie?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you asked that. It's definitely something that I thought about when I was trying to make my list of free agents. I was so tempted to put BG on that list when I'm, thinking about who the Aces might target. Ultimately, though, you kind of alluded to it in your question. Is Kelsey Plum going to be on the team or not? It seems like that wouldn't matter when you're talking about the front court, but I think it does in terms of what they're going to be able to do in free agency and like how much, like what they're going to put an emphasis on, like what they're going to prioritize, how much priority they're going to place on certain things. So that's been the huge question. I'm hoping we'll get some news with Kelsey Plum soon because I think that will kind of clarify the free agency picture for the Aces a little bit. But until then, it's all eyes on KP, I think.
Okay. Well, that was my next question. So there is no free agency news right now to report on the Aces.
Nothing that I have, but I mean, anything can happen. Like you mentioned, we're in an interesting era of WNBA offseason reporting. Like, who knows? I mean, that news could come from anywhere. It might not come from me. I would love for it to, but like, we'll just have to see.
Yeah. It also leaves though interesting questions for Phoenix because I mean, Kalia Copper just got there. Natasha Cloud came there, and maybe it's a thing where they're going to build around Ka. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of money in Phoenix. So do they want to try to keep and incentivize BG to stay and then build upon that? I know we're still a little unclear if Diana is retiring or not. And I know that matters a lot. So like the Mercury may have a lot of money to spend. And I think Kalia Copper as your star piece, even if someone like BG remains and is like considered the franchise star after Diana, obviously Ka at this point, I would say is the best player on the team. And so who wouldn't want to play with Kalia Copper? Before the Olympics, Asia told me that was the player who was a non-Aces player that she was most looking forward to playing with. So
yeah. I mean, it's funny, like trying to find things out about free agency. I had heard like maybe BG might be considering options, but one thing I heard like multiple times was that Diana Taurasi like has not decided. It's not like she's not telling people what her plans are. Like she literally has not made up her mind about what's going to happen next season. So to me, that's a fascinating. I'm so glad that you brought that up because I think that plays a huge role in what the Mercury might do this offseason, like whether or not they're going to have DT, who's such a core piece of their organization. That is going to be really interesting. Like I'm on the edge of my seat, just like waiting to find out whether or not she's going to play again. Because I think I mean, she did say herself, like, she's not somebody who's gonna do like a whole retirement tour. And that, I think this past season was like the closest thing we would have gotten, like, because the Mercury did this like will she, won't she thing, like if this is the end, and
Right.
honor DPs in like in an uncertain way. And so now it's like maybe that'll be all we get, and then she just rides off into the sunset. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really interesting how this has played out for Diana. So we will see. We'll hopefully get the answers to some of these questions soon. But until then, we will continue to monitor free agency, and we will come back and update and react as needed. Thanks, Callie. I appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks, Nat.